Hi, I'm Ami Devereaux. Probably you've been paying a lot of attention to this awful war in Ukraine, as I have. And along with my own compassion for the people there and all that they're going through, I've also been observing some of the conversation about what we should and shouldn't do. And you're probably doing that too. In fact, we've all kind of been turned into armchair generals, and we're all war gaming in our living rooms. One of the things that's been requested by President Zelensky is a no-fly zone. And of course, what he's thinking is he needs these Russian planes to stop dropping bombs. And of course, that is, everybody wants that. But if you read the newspaper, what the speculation has been is how would it play out if there were a no-fly zone? Because if there were one, the thinking goes, Putin would immediately violate it. NATO would be forced because of its red line to shoot a Russian plane out of the sky. Once the Russian plane is shot out of the sky, Putin would consider that an act of war and he would retaliate, most likely with a nuclear bomb. And it wouldn't take long, at least according to most of the analysts, for one nuclear bomb to cascade into a global nuclear war, and pretty soon everybody or a whole bunch of people are annihilated. Now, I am not voting on that thinking. I have no idea. I'm not an expert on foreign policy or on nuclear war. But one of the things that's very obvious and very interesting to me is the degree of importance that the planners and the war gamers are putting into looking at pessimistic scenarios. They're not saying we could have a no-fly zone and that'll solve the problem, the bombing will stop, and there'll be time for peace talks. No, what they're saying is, let's say we do that and things go badly. When you work in your own organization and you're doing strategic planning and you are doing scenario planning along with that, it is so easy to avoid pessimistic scenarios. And this is especially true where I work, which is in high growth tech startups, because founders and leaders of high growth tech startups are optimistic to a fault. In fact, it's almost taboo not to be optimistic. They're optimistic about getting funding, they're optimistic about getting traction in the marketplace, and they're optimistic about an ultimate valuation. And that makes it difficult to drag skepticism and pessimism into planning. But it's so critical that you do it. We have a cognitive bias toward optimism. That's just how we're wired as human beings. And thank goodness, right? Because otherwise, when things got tough, we wouldn't keep going. But if you're planning for your organization, you need at least one pessimistic scenario. Let me give you a really quick example of why this is so important. I was working with one client in particular who was just barely number one in their market. And the only reason they could hold on to number one was because the number two competitor, even though they had a slightly better product and a whole lot better marketing know-how, didn't have enough money to clobber my client. But had they had more money, they could have. We were doing strategy work and we were doing scenario planning, and we want to come up with a minimum of 4 scenarios. So immediately there are all these super optimistic scenarios on the table until one of the leaders, who doesn't talk that much, suggested, well, what if our competitor got acquired? Now, we do a preliminary SWOT analysis, so if there was a threat, we should have had that on the list, but it hadn't even made the list because no one had considered it. Immediately, everybody said, don't be ridiculous, that's not going to happen, there's no scuttlebutt about that, why do you think that? That went on for about 5 minutes until everybody kind of quieted down. You could hear their wheels turning in their brains. And suddenly the CEO said, you know what? They are perfectly positioned to be acquired. And if they got acquired by a global brand, it would destroy us. So that got included in the scenario and that got included in the strategic plan. And sure enough, within the next 6 months, that company got acquired by a giant brand. And they suddenly had the coffers to kill my client in the marketplace. But by then, they had actually made sufficient inroads into an additional market, diversified their messaging, created all of these new sales processes in order to penetrate this other market, and they were in a great position to continue to grow and operate and get their next round of funding despite that bad scenario. So it's really important as you go forward to consider these pessimistic scenarios. And you have to fight the urge always to be wanting to be positive in order to include them, because if you don't, it's a little bit like knowing that the weather's getting worse and flooding is getting worse, but pretending it'll never happen to you and not getting flood insurance. I'm in that exact position. I don't live in an official flood zone, but I went ahead and invested in flood insurance a few years ago because you know what? It's raining a lot and our roads are flooded a lot, and I don't want that to happen to my house. So fight your innate urge to be optimistic. And while you're at it, bear in mind that there are laws of economics that are not that dissimilar to the laws of physics. You know, things that are very, very expensive right now will not be that way forever. Cryptocurrency, it may not go up forever. Property prices, every time we think the market is completely infallible, it turns out we're wrong. Each time property prices get exorbitant, at some point they dip. So bear in mind those laws. What goes up comes down. Tomorrow will not be exactly like today, and things will go badly. Plan for it. I hope this has been helpful. Please subscribe to my channel just down there somewhere. And also visit my website. It's beyondbetter.io. Subscribe to the newsletter because it has much more sort of heft to it than this video. It has sources and links, more information that you can read about scenario planning and its history and why you should try to include a pessimistic scenario. And I'll see you soon. Thank you.